How many of you people believe that Apostle Paul was a good guy and followed Jesus and was a man of God? Let's see what Paul says. I asked a question. Hi, Uncle Jesus here. I asked a lot of questions. For 40 plus years I did until I finally escaped the cult. Let's see. I asked, why are the super apostles that Apostle Paul mentions in Scripture not in Scripture? Meaning they don't have books of their own, like Paul does most of the New Testament. And it says, the super apostles that Paul mentions in 2 Corinthians 11:5, by the way, that's when he admits in the 2 Corinthians that he robbed other churches and fooled them with trickery later on. The super apostles that Paul mentions in 2 Corinthians 11:5 are not in any scriptures. It says, because Paul uses the term sarcastically. Good old-fashioned sarcastic, tricky Paul. Yes, Paul used the term sarcastically to describe false teachers who are boasting and claiming to be more impressive than him, Paul. These guys that Paul is mentioning, he is mocking them, saying these super apostles. So he's just being sarcastic. You know, old sarcastic Paul. Apostle Paul was a sarcastic heister and an antichrister. That's what Uncle Jesus says. And that's what I've learned by reading his scriptures. Not mine. Let's see. Yes, Paul uses the term super apostles sarcastically to describe false teachers who are boasting and claiming to be more impressive than him. Now I ask any of you out there, who were they though? Were they made up in his head? What were their names, Paul? Paul, what were their names of these super apostles that you're mocking? Or are they just a figure of your imagination just to get people to think that you're the good guy? So these super apostles never wrote back to Paul and said, hey, you're a liar, or you're this and that. Only Paul knows about these super apostles, whether they existed or not. Yes, he said that they are not actual recognized apostles, but rather individuals who are deceiving the Corinthians with a false gospel and a different Jesus that Paul promotes. Because remember, anything that's not Paul's is a false gospel. Paul says himself that it's my gospel. So he doesn't want anybody else interfering with his religious cult. Yes, here are more detailed explanations. Not actual apostles. Paul uses the term super apostles sarcastically to mock false teachers who are claiming to be superior apostles. But once again, who are they? They don't exist. He is not referring to the 12 apostles, okay? You know, the guys that were with Jesus or the apostles. Now, there's a difference between apostles and disciples, but they're kind of blending them here. So he's not referring to the 12 apostles or other established apostles to the early church. And who are they, people? Who are they? You only get Paul and little tidbits of Peter and James. But Paul runs the show. It's Paul's gospel that you're believing in, not Jesus's. Let's see. False gospel and Jesus. These false teachers are preaching a different Jesus and a different gospel than who? Than Paul. Paul doesn't like that. It's going to mess up his churches. And Paul's teachings. They are essentially promoting a counterfeit version of Christianity, because after all, Paul has the correct one because he made it up. It's his. You get it? No, you still don't get it because you're indoctrinated. May the pickle jars of indoctrination be broken. Let's continue. Description. Paul describes these false teachers as deceitful workers who are disguising themselves as apostles of Christ, just like Paul was doing. But see, Paul was in charge, so it was okay. Yes, they are using their apparent, these false apostles, they are using their apparent impressive qualities to gain influence and deceive the Corinthians. That's why I, Paul, am here to help you. Who hath bewitched thee? You did, Paul. And you're bewitching them to this day. Lack of historic records. Because they are not actual apostles, there is no historical record or mention of them in other biblical or early Christian writings. That's what I said. There's no. So you got to take Paul's word for it that he's actually even mocking anybody that even existed or not. You got to take his word. But he's making it up to make himself look better, even with people that don't exist. Yes, their identities and activities are primarily known through Paul's letters. Yeah, Paul made all this, those super apostles that are telling the false gospel of Christ. He made it all up to make only his gospel, Paul's gospel, what he says about Jesus, what you're supposed to do with this Christ that Paul says. He wants to make sure he's the only one that delivers the message and is in charge of all the churches. Kind of reminds me of Catholicism, doesn't it? I know that's hard for you Christians to swallow, especially you Presbyterians and Baptists. Yes, their identities, activities are primarily known through Paul's letters. How convenient. Where he is defending his own apostleship and the true gospel. No, he's defending his own apostleship, which he says is the true gospel. How convenient to say that your gospel is the only true gospel about Christ because you made up a dream or had a dream. You know what the Old Testament says about people that had dreams. Tell them that you're a liar. You're just a farmer. We've had those messages before. I've discussed them already. Yes, there you have it. Who are the super apostles mentioned in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 5. Let's see what else Paul says and admits in 11, verse 5. Give me the verse in 2 Corinthians where Paul admits to robbing other churches. Are you ready? It's in 2 Corinthians 11:8, just 3 verses after the proud verse he made there. Yes, where Paul admits to robbing other churches. According to Bible study tools, 2 Corinthians 11:8, the verse states, I robbed other churches. This is Paul texting, okay? Taking wages of them to do you service. Paul uses this term sarcastically. Once again, Paul is so comfortable in his job as false apostle, and he knows that he's in the lordship seat, that he can be sarcastic. Why? Because there's nobody really listening to him anyway. The people he's talking about don't even exist. So, yes, I robbed other churches taking wages of them to do you service. Paul uses this term sarcastically emphasizing his willingness to sacrifice and not be a burden to the Corinthian believers. How convenient. He's a sarcastic heister and an antichrister. Jesus would not go for him. But many of you who say you believe in Jesus trust this Paul guy, who is an idiot. He's an idiot. Let's hear another one. Read a verse where Paul sarcastically says, I fooled you with trickery. It's another one. Of course, it's only sarcastic. 2 Corinthians 12, the next chapter, verse 16, where Paul sarcastically, now who's telling you this? The apologists, the Christian apologists. Yes, where Paul sarcastically says he may have tricked the Corinth church into supporting him. The phrase, crafty fellow that I am, that's what he says. I caught you with guile. Another translation says, I caught you with trickery. Paul's sarcasm. Yes, it says, it reflects similar variations in other translations. It reflects Paul's sarcasm, which Jesus didn't do, about his detractors' claims that he was deceitful in securing their support. Now, stop right there. Everybody, all you Christian apologists, who were Paul's detractors? They didn't exist. They're imaginary. He made it up to look good here. As you know, nobody ever wrote Paul back. Do you get it? This is a one-sided story. Talk about running the media. Talk about a one-eyed farmer. Do you people, so-called Christians, get it? You're in a candy-coated blood guilt cult. And this is one of the people that hold it together.